Okay, I hope you can see the screen and can hear me well. Okay, today we are also on Hong Kong. So this is the continuation from last week. We talked about what happened in Hong Kong in 2019. And then by 2020, the Chinese government implemented a security law for Hong Kong. So the law of the People's Republic of China on safeguarding national securities in Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, a very long mouthful of the title of the law. It is put into the Hong Kong Mini Constitution through a special provision when the national government, that is the government in Beijing, want to implement a nationwide, the whole nation policy, then this policy can be inserted into Hong Kong's special administrative regions through an appendix. And that appendix will need the Hong Kong government to ratify, and so the government can say, okay, we ratify that insertion, and then it will come into effect. So it is passed on the night before Hong Kong returned, the anniversary of Hong Kong returning to China. Hong Kong returned to China on the 1st of July. And this particular law is inserted into Hong Kong's mini constitution at the midnight of June 30th, 2020. And then since June is a month with only 30th, there's no 31st. So this is in the last hours. Okay, and then once it's inserted, then the clock changed. So effectively, it is inserted just before the anniversary. It came into force at the same day, and it establishes 4 crimes, only 4 crimes: secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign organizations. It said nothing about the right to free speech. It also said nothing about having protests in Hong Kong. You can still do protests, etc. What is not allowed is, of course, secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign organizations. The law is also not retrospective. That means all the crime which would be, no, let me put it that way, all the actions which will become a crime under this legislation in before June 30th, 2020 will not be considered, except when you are charged with new crime after the enforcement of this law, then your previous actions before 2022, before June 30th, 2020 will be taken into consideration. So if you wash your hand, get away, don't do anything, then whatever you have done in the past, you will not be prosecuted. But if you continue to act on either of these 4 crimes: secessions, subversions, terrorism, and collusion with foreign organizations after June 30th, 2020, then whatever you have done before will be also taken into consideration. I don't know whether this is a leniency or whatever, but some so-called democratic leaders in Hong Kong, such as Martin Lee and what's her name, something Chen, they all say, okay, under this law, we are no longer participating in any political activities. So they basically escaped punishment. But for some, I think they are still big enough to continue doing what they have been doing, thinking the Hong Kong police or the Chinese government will just behave like before. They make a very wrong assumption, and some of them are now in prison. So I will be looking at whether this is extraordinarily harsh or not by comparing it with some democratic countries later on. Another thing that is interesting is also in the mini constitution, in the Hong Kong's basic law, Article 23 actually spit out that Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall enact on its own to prohibit any act of treason, secessions, seductions, subversions against central governments, or theft of state secrets, to prohibit foreign political organizations or bodies from conducting political activities in the region, and to prohibit political organizations or bodies of the region from establishing ties with foreign political organizations or bodies. Now, this is specified in the Hong Kong Basic Law, but unfortunately, throughout the 20-something years, Hong Kong wasn't able to implement this article. Now, here we will see that secessions is included, sedations is subversions is included in the so-called the national security law in Hong Kong. Secessions, subversion, and collusion with foreign organizations, these three are actually included in the basic law. What is not included in basic law is terrorism. The Article 23 of the Hong Kong Basic Law doesn't include terrorism. Now, there is a historical aspect of that one, because the Hong Kong Basic Law was drafted in 1981 or 82. So at that time, terrorism is not one of the huge issues worldwide. So when the people drafting the basic law, they didn't realize that since the turn of the millennium, terrorism can become such a big problem. So in Article 23, there wasn't mention about terrorism. Some things are still not included in the national security law in Hong Kong, including treason. Oh, sorry. Including treason, theft of state secrets, and the basic law prohibit foreign political organizations and local organizations to make connections, because as a local government, a special region government, there's no reason for any political party in Hong Kong to establish international political relationship with other political parties. And that one is included in the special Hong Kong's national security law, which is the collusion with foreign organizations. The reason being that one of the reasons for the 2019 riots probably has been driven by the competition between China and United States. And hence, United States has been funding a lot of these riots, and in order to shut down that possibilities. So it is included in the law to forbidden collusion with foreign organizations, which will include lobbying foreign countries to apply sanctions to Hong Kong or the Chinese government. We know that during the 2019 riots, a number of political figures went to the US Congress and lobby for applying sanctions to both Hong Kong government officials as well as the Chinese government officials. That is considered illegal now from June 30th, 2020. So we can't advocate in other countries to apply political pressure or whatever in order to change the Chinese government. That is not allowed. Okay, now let's look at some of the national security laws in other countries. The first one to look at is, of course, ours national security law. Ours is very simple. It's very, very simple in comparison. Australian laws against terrorism in Part 5.3 of the Criminal Code Act 1995. The Australian laws against foreign incursion and recruitment is in Part 5.5 of the Criminal Code. They define a terrorist act as an act or a threat to act. That means both of these criteria, and there are two criteria here. The first one is intent to coerce or influence the public or any government by intimidation to advance a political, religious, or ideological cause. The second condition is it causes one or more of any of the following. Then the next four is or. You don't have to commit all the four. Any one of them will do. Is death or serious harm or danger to a person, serious damage to property, a serious risk to health or safety of the public, a serious interference with disruption to or destruction of critical infrastructure such as telecommunications or electricity networks, such as, so it should include, say, water, transport network, etc., and so on. Now, anyone guilty of committing a terrorist act can face up to life imprisonment. So the punishment is very high. Australians do not have capital punishment. So life imprisonment is the maximum penalty the states can apply to any person in Australia. We also note that a serious risk to health or safety to the public is also considered a terrorist act. And therefore, what we see in the anti-vaccine protest can be interpreted as a terrorist act if the government chooses to do so, because it poses a serious risk to the health of Australia. But obviously, our government haven't done that. But if they like to do it, that under this legislation, they can. The second one is what we look at is the United States. Here they have a very long list of different acts, and I will place them in chronological order. The first one is National Security Act in 1947. The stated goal of the National Security Act was to provide a comprehensive program for the future security of the United States. To accomplish this, the Act made several organizational changes. It combined the former Department of War. I remember that is 1947, just after the Second World War. So it combined the former Department of War and the Navy Department, which also include the U.S. Marine Corps, into the Department of Defense. So Department of Defense becomes an overarching organization to control the military forces, which also include the Departments of Army and Air Force. The reorganization was intended to create a clear and direct line of command for all military services to eliminate the duplication of efforts in the Department of Defense, particularly in the fields of research and engineering. So under the Department of Defense, there is a special branch to do research for war, to provide more efficient and economical administration in the defense establishment, to provide unified strategic direction for the armed forces, and to facilitate the operation of the military under uniformed command. And the United States President is the commander-in-chief of the United States military. Although the reorganization was not undertaken to establish a single chief of staff over the armed forces or an overall armed forces general staff, the act did establish the joint chiefs of staff to advise the president on military strategy and planning. The National Security Act placed a tremendous amount of emphasis on the coordination of national security with the intelligence community and its many capabilities. Most notably, the legislation created the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, and established the position of the Director of Central Intelligence, who was charged with managing the CIA as well as overseeing the entire intelligence community. The National Security Act also established the NSC, National Security Council, to assist in the coordination of the national security assets. The NSC includes the President, Vice President, and the President's National Security Advisor, and the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and other presidential appointees approved by the Senate. The NSC also manages smaller subcommittees to address threats to national security. So the National Security Act looks like it's an outward act looking at potential foreign enemies which may attack America. But that's not the only act. So there are the following laws as well. Espionage Act 1917, that is even older, prohibit obtaining information, pictures, or copyright description of any information related to national defense with the intent to hurt the United States or benefit a foreign nation. Now, to hurt the United States is different from benefit a foreign nation, but they included in the Espionage Act. The maximum penalty, death. Foreign agents registration action. Agents of foreign powers in a political capacity must disclose information about related activities and finances. So any people with relationship with foreign countries are required to disclose their financial details as well as what they are doing. The Alien Registration Act made it a criminal offense for anyone to advocate, abet, or teach the desirability of overthrowing the government. So that is the subversion. Maximum penalty, imprisonment for 20 years. As I said, the National Security Act in 1947 established the CIA. So in 1949, the CIA Act allows CIA the use of confidential fiscal and administrative procedures and exempts it from many limitations on the use of federal funds. That means the funding to CIA is not disclosed. Only a small number of people in the United States know the funding of CIA. But as it grows larger and larger, there are so many different funding venues for CIA. So I don't think there's one person knowing the total amount of funding the United States government provided towards the CIA. some of the national security is not limited to military or intelligence. They extended into the Trade Act. So in Section 301, which has been mentioned many, many times during trade disputes, in United States, they can activate Section 301, which authorizes the president to take all action to force a foreign government to remove any act, policy, or practice that the U.S. views as unjustified or restricts U.S. commerce. That means now the U.S. government can use coercion to force other country to comply with U.S. interests, whatever that is. And that means United States is now extending its own domestic legislations. This is the U.S. Trade Act to interfere with a sovereign country's implementation of their own law. So that I don't know whether that you will consider it as acceptable or not, but this act explicitly say that the president can take all action to force a foreign government to remove any act, policy, or practice. That means other government's legislation, if the U.S. view it as unjustified or restricts U.S. commerce. So that means if you do anything which damage U.S. interest, then the U.S. president can take whatever action he likes. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act 1978, the act creates the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to oversee requests for surveillance warrants by federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Now this FICSC, is a court, and therefore it is filled with judges, and these judges are specially selected to implement these search warrants or surveillance warrants when federal law enforcement requests it. And this is not an open court. Nobody knows what kind of warrants a federal law enforcement will require. As long as they say, oh, it is related to intelligence, then this court will usually pass the warrant, and therefore the U.S. federal law enforcement or intelligence agency then can do their surveillance. But it is worse than that. We will see that in two acts later, I think. Foreign Mission Act allows surveillance of foreign diplomatic personnel in U.S. soil. That means we say the embassy of a country should be considered as the sovereign of that country. But this law obviously is not understand it at this way. It's not talking about U.S. sovereign area. It's talking about U.S. soil, and that means when you have an embassy built on U.S. soil, then U.S. government will be able to survey, to provide surveillance on foreign diplomats. That includes acquisition of property, the number of members, political immunity for criminal offenses. So a lot of times, diplomats do enjoy criminal offense immunity, but this act removed that for United States. So that is not a common international practice. The National Security Education Act aims to enhance national security by attracting, recruiting, training national security workforce through different programs, including higher education. Economic Espionage Act 1996 that makes theft or misappropriation of trade secret a federal crime. So suddenly the state apparatus can be used for commercial purpose. When you have a trade secret and your trade secret is lost, the common understanding is you haven't kept your secret well. But here it is punishable as a criminal crime. We remember in 2001, 9/11, we have the September attack. After that, then the US introduced this Patriot Act. It dramatically reduced restrictions in law enforcement requests to search telephone records, emails, business, and health records. From what we know from people like Edward Snowden, the United States is now surveying the world. Any electronic information, if it is not encrypted, will be captured by the United States. Even if it is encrypted, then there's a backdoor for the US government to look at the content. And there is one of the reasons, at least from the conspiracy theory, that Huawei has been banned in the West because Huawei refused to implement a backdoor to their security system. I don't know if it's true or not, but that is what has been circulating among a lot of people. Homeland Security Act, it established the Department of Homeland Security and authorized it to control, direct and control investigations to prevent terrorism. So that is where the PRISM system, which Edward Snowden talked about, is implemented under the Homeland Security Act. Protect American Act is a controversial amendment to FISC. Remember this Foreign Investigations Surveillance Agency Court. This is FISA. It removes the warrant requirement for government surveillance of foreign intelligence targets reasonably believed to be outside the United States. That means United States now are gathering intelligence information all around the world. Foreign Investment and National Security Act, which will reveal foreign acquisition of US assets out of national security concerns. So any purchase of a major corporation or land or whatever, it has to go through this committee. This is a very powerful committee. I think we should have a similar committee in Australia. A Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act further expand this committee, the Committee on Foreign Investment, to review foreign investment outside its original scope. So anything more than I think is $10 million will have to undergo this review. Don't hold me on that because I can't remember the details. Weeks after the 2001 September 11 attacks, the US Congress voted almost unanimously in support of the notorious USA Patriot Act, vastly expanding the government's surveillance capacity. The result was unchecked government power to scope up citizens' private records and communications, carry out secret searches without warrant, and silence anyone who might otherwise challenge the government's action in courts. All it took was a bold assertion that someone is related to an ongoing terrorism or foreign intelligence investigation, and that someone will be check for whatever communication. Since then, racial profiling targeting people of Middle East has become prevalent in Western countries. But many of the Act's provisions have nothing to do with terrorism. Critics of the law were alarmed by its lack of judicial oversight and argued that it suppresses anti-war voices and target whistleblowers. There are a number of examples here. There's a Susan something, a former CIA asset covering Iraq and Libya, was falsely accused in 2003 of acting as an agent for Saddam Hussein. And the NSA massive surveillance program, also enabled by this Patriot Act, it has been much of the details have been released by Edward Snowden, who faces treason charges in the United States and have been seeking asylum in Russia at the moment. The US is not known for being lenient on those guilty of treason. So here's another example, Chelsea Manning. I think he was, before she becomes he is called Brady Manning. Okay, he is the one who released the classified documents in 2010 about US military actions in Iraq and Afghanistan, including videos of deadly airstrike. And if you want to look at that one, then you can search online on YouTube for collateral murder. It is released by Julia Assange. Economic rivalry in the name of national security. Under the Trump administration, the scope of US national security strategy has been increasingly stretched to dictate over commercial activities. The Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act of 2018 was specifically designed to restrict China's investment in sensitive industry in the name of protecting economic and social security interests. Citing the Foreign Investment and National Security Act, the Committee of Foreign Investment in the United States blocked a string of Chinese acquisitions of US companies at a time when US toughened its economic stance on China. Examples, Alibaba. Another example, Huawei. They are all targeted through this kind of act, including kidnapping of, say, Huawei's founder's daughter, who at that time was the chief financial officer of Huawei. And of course, we now know that she has been now released. We also heard about TikTok and other apps when Trump found that TikTok starting to produce videos which may hamper his election. So he started to apply pressure to stop TikTok to expand into United States using some via arguments. Okay, our friend in UK, the United Kingdom, it is even older. Obviously, UK is much older than United States. So Treason Felony Act 1848. It is treason felony to compass, imagine, invent, devise, or intend to deprive the Queen of her crown, to levy war against the Queen, to move or stir any foreigner to invade the UK or any other country belonging to the Queen. Maximum penalty, again, imprisonment for life. Alien Restriction Act 1919. Any alien, foreign people is being called alien, so is in the United States. Attempts or does any act calculated or likely to cause sedation or disaffection among any of His Majesty forces? Now, I don't know whether it is his or her majesty, but it seems that anyway, it is the crown or the forces of His Majesty allies or among the civilization, a civilian population. He or she will be reliable on conviction on indictment to penal servitude for terms not exceeding 10 years. Official Secret Acts 1989 protect legal protection in UK against espionage and the unauthorized disclosure of information. That information doesn't limit to government information. It also can apply to trade secrets as well. 2 years imprisonment or unlimited fine. Unlimited fine. Terrorism Act 2000. Very similar to Americans' Patriot Act to provide permanent UK-wide legislation and to cover all forms of terrorism, and to explicitly stipulate the definition of terrorism and terrorist organization. Maximum penalty, life imprisonment. Not enough, because soon after that we have the London Terrorism Act. So they come up with another one, Anti-Terrorism Crime and Security Act 2001. So it expands its definition to include religious, racial, ideological causes. The law also gave police forces a broad jurisdiction to fight terrorism. Prevention of Terrorism Act 2005 for imposing control orders upon those believed to be involved in terrorist-related activity. 2006, create new offenses including encouragement to terrorism, disinformation of dissemination of terrorist publications as preparatory to terrorism, making, misusing, possessing of radioactivity devices and materials. I'm very interested to know whether a physics radioactive device counter, the Geiger counter, will be included in this, because I know some of my physics colleagues in US or Hong Kong do personally buy some Geiger counters, because Hong Kong has a pretty high background radiation, and that's why they're interested to find out whether any new home they are going to buy has excessive radiation. And these devices today is pretty cheap. Counter-Terrorism Act 2008. Provisions on detention and questioning of terrorist suspects and the prosecution and punishment of terrorist offenses. I have no idea how long they can detain a terrorist suspect now, but given Julian Assange case, it seems to be indefinite. Counterterrorism and Security Act 2015. The duty for a number of specified authorities in England and Wales to have due regard to the need to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. So these so-called organizations includes local authorities, schools, civic education, health sector, prison, probation, and police, and so forth. Then I don't know whether you consider Julian Assange our Australian national hero, but in April 2019, he was arrested at the Ecuadorian embassy, putting an end of his nearly 7 years political asylum, and he is now still in prison in UK. So that is 2019, and today is 2022, plus the 7 years of political asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy is over 10 years now. And he just got married, by the way, in the prison. He made international headlines when the WikiLeaks, which he founded with some friends, published the leaked documents from Chelsea Manning. I think Chelsea Manning is quite stupid to let people know that it is he who dropped the documents to WikiLeaks. Now in custody, this 48 years old faces 18 criminal crimes. If he is extradited to US, he is facing 175 years of imprisonment, if convicted, of course. The London court began hearings early this year to decide whether Assange should be extradited to United States. The hearing will not decide if he is guilty or anyone doing, or whether the extradition request meets the requirements set out under the treaty. The current treaty has been criticized for allowing the UK to extradite a person to US solely on the basis on an allegation or an arrest warrant without evidence being produced, despite the fact that probable cause is required for the extradition the other way. So again, this is a different political environment, and therefore we understand it in this way. So I'm now going to stop the share screen and then invite questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. You have any question, please unmute yourself first and then ask the question. Anyone? No?
Yes, I will, Albert.
Yes, please.
How are you? That's
good, thank you.
It's actually Howard Tanky, but I don't know where those numbers and letters came from.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, look, when you're comparing laws, I mean, laws are just words and they can be interpreted any way you like.
Yes.
And it's only when governments and countries act is, you know exactly what they really mean.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if you can discern from the actions of China and America and England and to a lesser extent Australia, because we're far less important, sort of discern what sort of national values and goals that these countries have, as demonstrated by not just the words on bits of paper, but by their actions. Can you, like, for example, a very simple one, like, you know, the principle of free speech.
Let me use an example in Hong Kong. Now, we know the rioting in Hong Kong in 2019 is almost a weekly occurrence until probably the insertion of this national security law in Hong Kong. Again, this is not a very clear cut, because we know that COVID-19 started in the rest of the world, at least in early 2020. And this security law is implemented in mid-year. So there's a half a year overlapping of the COVID and the riot before this security law. And then later on, we see a very sharp difference in terms of Hong Kong people's security walking in the streets. Before this national security law, a lot of common Hong Kong citizens is afraid to wander out at night. And when they do wander out, the first thing they do is check on the social platforms to see where the protests will be held that evening. And they try to avoid to go to those areas. So life has not been very good. But after the implementation, then the main, I think, I would say the main financier for the riots has pulled their plug, and we see a drastic decrease in the number of protests. Now, again, the next day, July the 1st, is the anniversary of Hong Kong returning to mainland China. And in the past 27 years, that day is a day of, obviously it's a holiday because it celebrates the return of Hong Kong to mainland China, but it's also a day of protest. So on that one day, on the July 1st, 2020, a motorist riding a motorcycle holding a flag which symbolizes the protest in 2019, crashed his motorcycle into a police line from the back. So the police was setting up a line in order to separate the protests from the rest. But he ride a motorcycle and crashed into the police. Luckily, I think 2 police was knocked down, but not serious hurt. And he was arrested, and he was charged under the national security law. So he is the first one to be charged under the national security law. And he was charged for disseminating the sedation messages, because his flag asked for overthrow of the Chinese government, saying that the Chinese government is not democratic elected government, and hence he was promoting his version of democracy by promoting ideas of overthrow of the Chinese government. Then we see it is against the national security law, and therefore he is arrested. I think he is now serving 7 years imprisonment for dangerous driving, as well as for this law against the national security law. I think 7 years and 10 months, if I can remember correctly. He had admitted to guilt, and therefore 1/3 of the punishment will be deducted from the crime, and therefore I think the original punishment will be something like 12 years plus the dangerous driving, etc., but reduced to 7 years and 11 months, I think. So that is what happened in Hong Kong. After that, there are 1 or 2 people charged under this national security law. The obvious one is actually Jimmy Lai. I think a lot of people heard about him. Jimmy Lai is the one who holds the next what's that? One of the company which sells newspaper and so forth in Hong Kong. We know that most of the money flowing into Hong Kong for promotion of democracy is flowed through his hands. I don't know who is actually the boss. Okay, according to what we know, there is a U.S. Marine intelligence officer, Simon something, who is his so-called second man. And a lot of people in Hong Kong say actually Jimmy Lai is controlled by Simon rather than Jimmy Lai controlled Simon. So the relationship is a bit. And before Jimmy Lai is being arrested, Simon escaped, and he is now wanted by Hong Kong to be tried for national security. The charge is the financing of terrorism in Hong Kong, because the law is not retrospective, but if you have done anything after the law is implemented, then your deeds before the law will be taken into consideration. And there are evidence that after the introduction of the civil law, the rioters is still financed by Jimmy Lai. Therefore, the government is charging him for this one. So that will be a long process. Do I answer your question, Howard? Yes, please.
No, I don't think. Basically, I guess a simple way of asking it is in terms of human rights. Which countries do you think, in which order would you put them in terms of good to bad?
Oh, human rights. A good question.
No, just those three.
Yeah.
But I mean, basically, those laws are impinging very much on individual human rights, aren't they? And and which do you think America is better than China or vice versa? Just
you compare these two. I think it is a apple and orange comparison. There are two different systems, and Chinese and Americans have very different cultural values, and therefore it is very difficult to compare. Now, I put forward the Chinese view, okay? But you can obviously put forward the American views, but I put forward the Chinese view. The Chinese, for example, during this COVID-19, they are happy to sacrifice a little bit of individual freedom in exchange for a larger freedom. What do I mean by that? For example, when you look at, say, Wuhan, when the COVID-19 erupted. So Chinese government actually closed off the whole city. The government only closed off the city by not allowing citizens to leave Wuhan. But once that is imposed, then the communities, for example, let's say a estate, like for example, one of our many buildings establishment which have a wall around them. Okay, so there's a community. The community personnel in the community also respond to government's call and forbidden citizens to leave that community. And in terms of every building, and then the building's own little committee will organize themselves and stop any person from leaving that building. So suddenly it seems that everybody is being locked down. Of course, in that situation, then there is a logistic requirements for people who may need medicine, who may need vegetables, etc., etc. And these are all organized through local communities. So suddenly the whole city is locked down. If I remember correctly, Wuhan is locked down on the 28th of January, the Chinese New Year Eve. And then it is reopened on 15 April. So it's almost a 3 months lockdown. In exchange, the Chinese government, the Chinese has a total COVID cases or infections of around 80,000, a total death of around 4,000. So the Chinese people sacrificed 3 months of their individual freedom in exchange for the health and wealth of millions of people. Today, American just passed 1 million deaths out of COVID-19, and they have 80 million infections. The effect of long COVID, that means after you are infected by COVID, then your body will have some damages, including the damage to the heart and so forth. And we cannot ascertain how much is that cost to the future health system, because there's one research saying that 1 year after the infection of COVID, of getting COVID, the chances of getting a heart problem is 2 to 6 times for those who haven't contracted COVID. So there is a huge health implication later on. But the Chinese consider, yes, we are paying a small price in terms of our individual freedom. We are happy to do that. Recently, Shenzhen, a 14 million people city, had just locked down for 1 week. Again, because the leak of about 300 COVID cases in the city. So because of 300 cases, the whole Shenzhen is locked down for a week. And every citizen in Shenzhen need to take 3 PCR, the nuclear acid test. If they are all negative for all 3 cases, then they are free to move around. And they have a mobile health code. This mobile health code has 3 colors. If you have a color green, you can go anywhere. If you have a color yellow, you need to report to the infectious disease hospital within, I think, 1 week, but they will get you in within 24 hours. If you have a code red, you are not allowed to go anywhere. You must stay home. And for people who have that information, for example, being a close contact, or their test results come back positive, then you will be required to stay at home, and the ambulance will come here to collect you. When you are collected, you are required to put in a PPE, the personal protective clothing, so that the virus will not spread out, and then they will take you to a quarantine facility. So this is the situation in Hong Kong now. And if you like, I think, let me just see whether I can find a tweet which talk about some person in Shanghai, a expert, husband, I suppose it's husbands and wife. Both of them are tested positive a number of days ago. Let me see whether yes. So I'm going to share this screen with you. She is called Emma Linen. Okay, let me just start the share screen and then we can take it from there. Okay. Yep. Share screen. Yeah. This one. Okay, this is from Twitter. Okay, Twitter. Emma Linen. This lady. we can look it from the beginning. March 23rd, so 3 days ago, okay, 3 days ago, just found out Lin Shen, her husband, okay, has COVID-19. So both of them are packing up, waiting for CDC, the Chinese version of the Center for Disease Control, to arrive. He will go to hospital because he tested positive. I will be taken to a quarantine. We are okay, but not looking forward to the next 3 weeks, okay, from Shanghai. So we are, I think I'm in that. So this is her showing the little package they are going to take to the hospital and quarantine hotel. Okay. This is something he's, let me just, I think it's better to actually look at her food treat, because that was the update. Okay, here. So police are blockading the whole building because now they found that there are COVID cases in the building. So the police are blocking all the buildings, and she have her 2 dogs being looked after by a friend. And so the 2 dogs are allowed to leave, but not the residents. The residents will need to do tests before they are allowed to look at the people disinfecting all the things from the dogs before they are let off. Okay. And she is leaving because her transport has come. And this is her quarantine area. So everyone is in their own room, and there's a plastic thing at the door. This is where food and supply will be left here. After the worker place the food here, they will knock on your door, and you are asked to wait 3 minutes before open up and get the food inside, because they don't want you to infect all the workers. And there are surveillance camera here. So if you leave the door, leave from go out, then you will be caught almost instantly. So they have what, 24 bottles of water, a bit of different things for them. This is her bed. I think it's not bad, this room. The toilet. Okay, so this is her condition. Not home, but not bad. Let's get this done. Okay. Then he asked about, I don't have sufficient water. 24 bottles not enough. Then the replies, yeah, this is all we can provide to you. You want more, we can buy it for you. $2 per bottle, $2 renminbi. $2 renminbi is about $1 here. And this is today's menu, what they got. This is morning. So they got a drink, which is walnuts and peanuts. Protein drink. I think this is Chinese bread and an egg. Okay. It's morning, and they have some Chinese medicine, which they are asked to have 3 packets a day. So these are the Chinese medicine which will help you fight COVID, and it have been proven. I think this is her one of her meal. Rice. I think there's a piece of chicken somewhere here. Some white radish. I think this is some kind of vegetable and other bean curd stuff thing. But she said it is delicious. Okay. And there's another meal. So 1 breakfast, 2 meals per day, supplied by the quarantine, and these are free. You don't have to pay because the government forced you to quarantine. And she started drinking tea. Okay, not a problem. She doesn't know what this is. And after testing positive, okay, her husband is now ready to go to the hospital, and then her husband is asked to put on the PPE. Okay, I think this is her husband. Okay, with her looking at her husband getting dressed up in order to go to the hospital. And not good. The hospital is cold, no running water. Okay, this is her husband's bed, I suppose. Keeping in touch with them through, of course, social media. Okay, they don't know what is this Chinese traditional Chinese medicine. Okay, but anyway, it is not compulsory. Just advise you to take it. Okay, today's menu, we have the pumpkin soup, some Chinese bread and egg.
Excuse me, Albert, can I interrupt there for a moment? Sorry to do that, but you know, I think you know, you've demonstrated serious cultural differences, obvious cultural differences, and leading to different responses to the different responses to COVID as a result. But I just wonder whether there are people there want to ask some sort of questions on sort of those national security laws more. So yes, it's just a suggestion.
The Hong Kong people accepted the national security law quite well. I would put it that way. Most people is not against the law, from what I can gather, because their life had returned to normal. Put it that way. In 2019, their lives was very much disrupted by the riots. So a lot of my contacts in Hong Kong, actually, I mean, Howard, you know that I'm now a YouTuber. My number of subscribers rises very quickly, and that is during 2019, when I was talking about the my feeling towards Hong Kong about all these riots. So from my contact, from my audience, many of them are pretty positive and saying that it helped them to get back to a normal life. But at the moment, Hong Kong is also facing another issue, is the fifth wave of COVID. Hong Kong is having about 10,000 cases every day, and about 150 people die every day. So at the moment, there's another big political issues arising from this government's inaction towards the fighting of COVID. I think I might also say a few words about the zero COVID. We are going to what we call live with COVID, but the Chinese is still insisting of a dynamic zero tolerance towards COVID. Dynamic zero tolerance means the equilibrium points, the ideal equilibrium point is zero COVID. But given this is a dynamic case, so when COVID cases do arrive, we will try our best to return it to zero. So that is the guiding principle of zero COVID. In order to do that, then they talk about three quicks. Three things must be done very quickly. Number one, isolate. We want to isolate the patients as quickly as possible so that it has the minimum chance to spread. The second is quick testing. So when there is any case developed, then a quick lockdown and a quick test. The third is quick, how do we translate that? Quick cure, quick to provide medical care to those who are infected. So these are their policy. And what we see, for example, in the 2020 Winter Olympics in Beijing, they implement the so-called closed circuit strategy. That means when the teams arrive in Beijing, they will go into quarantine directly. And once you are in quarantine, then you are not allowed to leave until the games is over. So all the basically Beijing created a bubble, and that bubble is enforced so that there's no contact between the bubble, the inside of the bubble and the outside of the bubble. So even for volunteers volunteering for the Beijing Olympics, the volunteer will stay with the athletics teams throughout the games. They are not allowed to leave. So they enter into the bubble and then will stay with the bubble until the whole thing's over. And then they will have to quarantine for 2 weeks, even there's no outbreak inside the bubble. So that is the way the Chinese is treating personal so-called freedom. They're willing to sacrifice the freedom in order to achieve a common good. Okay, anyone else? Any question? How you want to follow up?
Yes, Albert. In
Yes.
the Western society and ours in Australia in particular, I'm including Europe and America, we go by, certainly here in Australia, the 3 levels of law. One is or organisation. One is the Queen or the President at the top of the pyramid. Then we have Parliament. And very importantly, we have the judiciary, which is the 3rd independent arbiter of what's fair, what's right, what's wrong. We go by the rule of law. I only make the comment, I would rather be charged as a terrorist or as somebody that's done sedition or something against the state here in Australia, because I'd be going towards the judiciary as the judgment, than going to any sort of charges in China. The riots in Hong Kong were many-fold. I recall going to Hong Kong while it was under British rule or British influence. It was a very vibrant society. I went a couple of times. Very, very vibrant, economically, socially, you just name it, vibrant. I went since. I wouldn't want to go back again. The riots in Hong Kong in more recent times reflected a number of issues. Amongst them was the association to the rule of mainland China and the fears that the people had there for their individual human rights. But those riots also reflected a lot of dissatisfaction with the mainland rule, and in particular things such as, and it's not uncommon here in Australia, housing availability, housing affordability, a number of other economic and social issues. So the riots really were many-pronged. That's my only comment with it. So, and the fact that some guy drove his motorcycle into the police, well, look, in any riot, you're going to get some fringe hooligans, and maybe he was it. But his, if he was charged with dangerous driving and got 9 or 10 or 11, whatever it years reduced to, that's a pretty strong penalty for driving your motorbike. The other part of raising a flag, well, I only make the comment here in Australia, you can disagree and dissent, and you won't necessarily be put in jail right away. So that's where I just sort of say the 3rd level of judiciary is very, very important here in Western rule of law society. That's my only comment.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Now,
I've enjoyed your comments.
So thank you. Now, let me put it this way. What if we put up a Nazi symbol in front of our house or a Nazi symbol on our car? What will the consequence of that one in here, Australia? Will our government charge us or not? I don't know. Okay, I don't know. I don't know. No, I'm not asking anybody to try this, but I don't know.
No, I don't believe that they would, but they would turn around. Some people in the community would probably likely vandalise your car, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
No, but I'm not
I think the difference is that if you are charged with something in Australia, a la your Nazi symbol, you'll go to an independent judge. I think the conviction rate in China for any court case is something like 98%. Is that correct? So if you get charged, you're guilty. Whereas in Australia, I think we work on a different basis that you're guilty until is proved guilty. And it's not the government per se that charges you. It's the police, and it's judged by an independent judiciary. So I think that's where we start to have some differences.
Okay, now let me explain the law system. Generally, there are two law systems in the world. Okay, what we subscribe to is the so-called common law system. Another law system is called continental law. For example, in Germany, the difference here, the difference in these two systems is whether the judge is part of the interpretation of the law. In common law situation, our judges is an interpreter of the law, and therefore any case becomes an example which can influence subsequent cases. In continental law, which China subscribed to, give the ability of setting and implementing the law to the parliament instead of to the judiciary. Okay, so if there is a case which require an interpretation of the law, it is not done by the judge. It's done by the people who actually wrote the legislature, the parliament. So that is a main difference. I understand our system here is the common law system, which the judge, as an independent person, will interpret the law and rule on a case, and that ruling becomes part of the law. But in continental law, it's not like that. All cases are cases. They don't become part of the law. Every time when a case is presented to the court will interpret the case almost literally. If there's any difference, then it will go back to the parliament and so forth to clarify. That had happened in Hong Kong last time about what? About the Chinese government also want the Hong Kong Legislative Council. Let me face it other way. The government, let's say Australian government, want members of our parliament to be loyal to Australia. I think this is a very fair requirement. If everybody in Australia preach their loyalty to Australia, then there's not a problem. But if there's any foreign people who has political ambitions, but the political ambitions is not for the benefit of Australia, for example, for the benefit of the United States, there's no way we will limit these people from entering into our parliament. If they can run their election good enough, get enough votes, they can still go into our parliament. That isn't the case in Australia here, because obviously, except people like Tony Abbott who pledge loyalty to the Queen rather than to Australia, we don't have a lot of this kind of politicians. But if our politicians, for example, Scott Morrison, pledge his royalty, say to USA rather than Australia, what will happen to us? I think this is a serious question. Do I have example of Scott Morrison doing that? Let's say I have at least one. Remember our submarines? We have an agreement with the France to build our submarine. And then without actually negotiating with France, he now pledged to build a nuclear powered submarine using either American or UK technologies, which will delay our acquisition of submarines at least by 10 years. Is he serving our national interest or serving the interest of the military industrial complex of America? I question that. Yes, please.
The best way Scott Morrison could serve Australia's interest is by resigning.
Will he?
That would be the best thing for him to do. I couldn't care who he pledges allegiance to. As soon as he resigns, that will help us.
Sorry to get into Australian politics now. But anyway, for that interpretation, how to ensure only patriots can enter into the Hong Kong legislation, then it will require a reinterpretation of the law. And because that part of the law is inserted into Hong Kong's legislation rather than through our common law system. So the law go back to the National Congress, People's Congress in China. And when the National Congress meets, then they have a subcommittee working on it and then finally rule on the law for Hong Kong. So there is difference between the common law system and the continental law system. So from people like us coming from a common law system, we will find the independent judiciary very important. But just look at the recent American Supreme Judge nominee. What's her name? A black woman.
Jenky Brown Jenkins. Sorry, Jenky Brown Jenkins, is it?
Johnson. Is that Johnson?
Johnson. Yeah.
Johnson. Yeah. You look at the Senate inquiry. It's almost look like witch hunting. So again, the Supreme Judge is political. It's also, when we argue they are not, then it is, no, we are not looking at the reality. And that's why the president try to nominate as many Supreme Judge as possible, because that is very political. So when we say we have an independent judiciary, to a certain sense, yes, but up to a point, then you will become political again. Yes, any question?
Well, I've got one.
Yes, please.
But in terms of national security, some countries keep a low profile, like traditionally Switzerland. And I think to an extent, China's been doing that. Whereas America in particular has taken a fairly belligerent approach to other countries, invading them unilaterally. And I just wonder how much that disadvantages America in terms of its national security compared with China, which keeps out of other countries' affairs in the main.
Well, yeah, from the UN Charter, the United Nations Charter, it has already stated that every country should stay out of the domestic policies of another country. So that is the common understanding when the UN Charter was formulated. But of course, at the moment, we see that the Americans are having the so-called law-armed jurisdictions. They try to use their domestic law to enforce or coerce other country to change. So whether that is good or not, again, I think international politics depends on power. You are powerful enough, you can get anything you want by either coercion or convincing. Okay, but both ways, whether it's carrots or stick. But in the other sense, you really have to consider humankind as a collective. Then I think there are some human decency which we all subscribe to. And then beyond that, that will be national interest. What I call human decency probably should include, say, our right to have a healthy environment, our right to have a safe environment to live, and our right to have a freedom to do whatever we like. That, of course, you can list out whatever your values are. But should we impose our values on the other? I think that is the issue. If I may subscribe to, okay, I'm willing to die because I don't want to get injected with the vaccine. But your refusal to take the vaccine might cause, when you are infected, higher chance of being hospitalized, and hence have a burden on the health system. If too many people are doing that, then our health system will be burdened, which will cause other patients who are not COVID to have delayed treatments. So is that a fair situation? Can the government force everybody to have an injection? So there are two arguments here. On one side, I have the right to say I don't want to take the vaccine. But on the other side, from a public point of view, if too many people doesn't take the vaccine, then if the virus do come, then our hospital will be overwhelmed. And therefore, some patients who may, for example, need dialysis, the cleaning because of liver, etc., delay their treatment, causing secondary deaths. Your contact of virus cause another person's death. So where do we put the line? We put the line as, okay, we respect your personal freedom not to take the vaccine, or we take the view of the public good and say, no, we don't allow you to do that, because if the virus do attack us, our hospital system will be overwhelmed. I want you to take the protection. I think that is something we will be looking on as a human. So national security is a very tricky one. If you allow me, let me take on another very controversial topic and let everybody think about that. Is the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The question is, who is to blame? If you only look at recent events, it's Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. You will take the event to, say, December last year. At that time, Russia said, we want Ukraine to remain neutral. We don't want NATO to expand to our doorstep, because if NATO is, if Ukraine is as a NATO's member, NATO may put the missile in Ukraine, which is only 10 minutes from Moscow. Is that a good argument? Then we'll look back at 1962, the Cuba missile crisis. At that time, American put some ballistic missiles in Turkey. The USSR responded by putting some missiles in Cuba. And of course, we know what happened. And then we have, the world is almost destroyed. But luckily, Kennedy and I can't remember who is the president in USSR, they agree, and then the crisis de-escalate. So America is not able to face missiles in Cuba and use military actions to force. Now, the military action is a naval blockade of all ships into Cuba. So it is a military action. Of course, by comparison, the military action of Russia is much more harsh in a way, okay? But they are both military actions. So who is to blame? Now, if we push it back even further, in 1991, just before Soviet collapse, I think at that time it's Gorbachev and America reached an agreement that NATO will not expand towards the east for even 1 inch. But that expansion has been done in 5 phases. It is now almost at the Russians' doorstep. So if we want to look at the responsibility, it depends on the time frame we are looking at. You're looking at the time frame for the past, say, 1 month, the fault is all on Russia. But you look at the time frame even a bit longer, we might have a different view on national security. I think I put it as a question for people to consider. I'm not going to provide answer of right and wrong. I just this is a situation, a moment. You can check the history, and I'm not a history student, so my history is very bad, but I have already pointed a few areas that we can check, and then we thinking whether is militarism a solution to our problem, or diplomatic discussions a solution to the problem. I think this is an issue the world has to think about carefully. No answer, sorry. Awkward silence. But anyway, in that case, next week, I will talk about how the life of some people, some Hong Kong people in UK, because after the national security law is inserted into Hong Kong, a lot of government said they will allow people from Hong Kong to migrate to their country, including United Kingdom. So they relaxed the BNO, the British National Objects, okay, whatever, okay, BNO passport holders who do not have residential rights in UK to extend their visa for 5 years. Mm-hmm. And then after that, then they can apply for UK citizenship. And then 1 more residential year that they will get this UK citizenship. That means if you are a holder of a BNO, then you will be able to get a UK citizenship by living living in UK for 6 years. So we were looking at we will look at some of those people who use this opportunity to go to UK and look at how their lives is next week. Okay, thank you so much. And then we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Albert.
Thank you, Albert.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good week.
Good.
Bye-bye.